Hello, so today we are going to do this problem, which is part of August daily challenge. The problem is my calendar one. So basically, what we have is we want to implement a calendar where we can add a new event if it will not cause a double booking. So if there is no conflict or there is no overlap with another existing interval. And a double booking, this is just explaining that a double booking is when you have two events, right, with a start and a finish time, and they have a non-empty intersection, right? And the event is represented by, of course, just start and end. However, this is important here is that it's a half open interval. So start is included, but end is not, right? So the range is not closed at the end. And the range of real numbers, so basically this is what it means. It's the numbers between start and end, but end is not inclusive. And the class we want to implement, it has of course an initializer and has a book function with start and end, and that function returns true if we can add the event to the calendar and false if not. And we can't add the event if it will cause a double booking, if it will overlap with another interval. So that's the problem. Now let's take a look at an example here. So we have first 10 to 20, right? So this is maybe 20 like this. And then after 20, so this is 10, we have something that starts 25 to 15 to 25, that is. So 15, maybe something like this, to 25 here, and then 20 to 30, right? So you can see already this one we can't add it because then we'll have an overlap, but we can add this one because 20, this is, remember this is not inclusive, so this is open interval here, and so we can add 20, 30. So we return true here, we return false for the second one, right, because there was an overlap, so we couldn't add it, and then we return true for the first one. Yeah, so that's pretty much the problem. Now let's see how we can solve it. Okay, so let's see how we can solve this. So the first thing we know that we need to do is definitely, since with this book here, we need to check if there is an overlap between two intervals. So the first thing we need to think about is how to detect an overlap. And so what we can do is let's just go case by case into different examples or different cases of intervals and see if we can find a general function or general formula to check to determine if two intervals overlap, right? So to do that, let's just say, for example, we have two intervals, right? Let's say we have A, which is basically maybe just A1 and A2 for the end and the start, and B, which is B1 and B2, right? So these are the two intervals that we get, and we want to check if they overlap. So we have a couple of cases, right? Either, let's say A is like this, right? So basically B ends before A. And so something like this, so B1, B2. So B ends before A. Okay, so this is our first case. So in this case, you can see the overlapping interval, so the overlapping piece is this here, right? Okay. What is this value here? So this value actually is just the minimum of the two, the maximum of the two, so the one to the right more, so the maximum of A1, B1 here, and the minimum of these two, right, of the end, which is minimum of A2 and B2. And this makes sense because to overlap, we need to go to the common area, and common area is, of course, the start is just the higher value, right? And then the end is the smaller value, right? Because we want the common portion. So with this formula, this is what it is. So with this, if we want to detect an overlap, we can just check. If this is smaller than this, if the start is smaller than the end, then we have an overlap, right? Um, okay, so now let's check another use case here. So if basically this is if the max of, which is the start of A1 B1 is smaller than the min of A2 B2, then we have an overlap. This means basically an overlap. So this is a good start. Now let's see if it applies to other examples. So let's take another case here where we have, okay, so the first case was B ends before A, right? So naturally the second case can be B ends after A, right? And so in that case, what would be the example? So maybe we have something like this, and this is A2, and then B ends after, so something like this. So in both cases, B starts after A, and here B starts after A. One thing I want to mention is that this analysis case by case to solve a problem is a good technique to use. So just keep it in mind. And now we have B1, B2, right? So in this case, does this still applies? So what's the intersection here? What's the overlapping piece? It's this until here, right? So same thing, it overlaps from to get the overlap, again, it's just the one that starts the latest and the one that ends the first, right? That's the overlap if there is any overlap. And again, this interval, what is this interval? This interval is just the max of A1 and B1, which is B1, right? And then the end is the min of A2 and B2, which is A2 in this case. And again, this is a valid interval if this is smaller, right? And so same thing here, we have this formula valid, a valid way to check here, right? Sorry. Okay. Now I'll see another last case where there is no overlap and see if we are able to detect it with this. So case 3, basically B starts after. So in both cases here, B starts after A, but before A ends, right? And here, let's have B starts after A ends so that there is no overlap. And we don't need to do this like for A ends before B because then it's the same thing, right? It's just we are swapping which one we are calling A and which one we are calling B. So we don't need to do that, the analysis for, let's say, A ends before B because that will amount to the same thing. And same thing with A starts after B ends, right? So with this last case here, what we have is A1 here, let's say, A2 here, and then we have B1 here, and B2 here. Okay, so there is no overlap, right? But if we were to pick this formula here, so this is no overlap, but if we were to pick our formula, what will happen to how can we check if there is, basically what I'm looking for is if this is false, can we say that there is no overlap, right? So let me paste this. So what is the max here? So this is A2, right? Sorry, the max between A1 and B1, that's B1. And the min between A2 and B2, that's A2, right? But you can see here, right? A2 is smaller than B1. And so this is our start and this is our end. So what we have because of this is that our end is smaller than our start, right? So this is not a valid interval. So our check here is false. So this is false, which means no overlap. Okay? So right away what we can say now is with this analysis is that to check if there is an overlap, we just need to check if the max of both A1 and B1 is smaller than the min of A2 and B2, that means we have a valid overlap. So there is an overlap. If it's false, that means there is no overlap and we can book the interval. And that's pretty much the main thing we need for this problem. So what do we do with the rest? So sorry about this. So what we need to do here is in our booking function here, we just need an array that saves all the bookings. And then when we are booking, we just take every interval already in booking and check if it overlaps with the new one. If we find only one that overlaps, we return false and we don't add the interval. And if we don't find anything that overlaps, then we return true and add the interval. So that way, it's pretty simple solution. The main tricky part is to know how to detect the overlap easily. Yeah, so that's pretty much it. Let's code this up and make sure it passes test cases. Okay, so let's write down what we saw in the overview. So we need to have an array of the bookings so far. So let's say an empty array starts out as an empty array, and now we need to check if there is an overlap. So let's create. So let's just go through the bookings, right? So for B in self.bookings, we want to check if there is an overlap. So we'll create that function between B and the interval, this interval. So let's call this interval A, start, end. So we want to check if there is an interval between these two. If there is, we want to return false. If there isn't, we want to return true, but we want to also add this interval because we are able to add it. Okay. And now let's create this function for overlap between A and B. So what we said is we just need the max of A1 and B1 to be smaller than the min of A2 and B2, and A1 and B1, A1 and A2 are just the start and the end of the interval A. So let's just write it like that. And B1 and B2 are the start and the end of B. So if this is the case, that means there is an overlap. If not, there is no overlap, right? So we just return it. And yeah, that's pretty much it. So let's run this. Here we need to just make it valid. Okay, let's see what's the problem here. So there is an invalid syntax. Yeah, so I think it just needs, and this is like a, okay, yeah, we don't need this, sorry. Okay, so that seems accepted, so let's submit. Okay, so that passes test cases. Now, it's not the fastest solution, but I think it's the easiest one to explain. To get a faster solution, you could, for example, have bookings be a sorted list, and then just binary search for this new interval. If you don't find it, return. If you don't find it, there is no overlap, but if you find it, then there is an overlap. Yeah, but that one is a little bit trickier, so yeah, I'll stick with this solution. Yeah, so that's pretty much it. Please like and subscribe, and see you on the next one. Bye.